The latest series on In the Field with Goulds Water Technology, called Small Business Toolbox, provides groundwater pros like you with info and resources to help you run your business more effectively. This episode was recorded with Jeff Williams of Vermont-based Spafford & Sons Water Wells in Wisconsin Dells while he was touring the country giving presentations to various NGWA chapters on financial literacy. We dove into topics ranging from an overview of asset management to succession planning. Enjoy the show. Hi, and welcome to In the Field with Goulds Water Technology, a solving water podcast from Xylem focused on the residential water and irrigation markets. I'm joined today in scenic Wisconsin Dells by Jeff Williams and my colleague Susan O'Grady, and we're going to be kicking off our latest podcast series on a topic that I'm really excited about: helping the dealer grow and manage their business. And Jeff, Susan and I are especially looking forward to our discussion with you about the importance of understanding business finance when you're running a small business in the water well industry. We're actually going to cover a few topics with you today, which our listeners will be able to access via individual episodes. So, Jeff, why don't you start by telling us about yourself and why we're here in the Dells, of all places?
The exciting Wisconsin Dells. I'm a water well contractor for nearly 40 years. I've been involved in volunteering on several associations over the last couple, 3-4 decades, however many it's been. Always have been, I guess you could classify me as a lifelong learner, and I continuously look for new challenges. Even though change is hard for most of us, we have to keep going forward, right? I'm here because of the McElhaney Lectureship from the National Groundwater Association and the Groundwater Foundation. I have 20 business-focused lectures to do around the country in 2020, and Wisconsin Dells is the second stop on that tour of lectures. So I'm excited to be here. It's nice country, the people are great, and I'm happy to be able to have solid conversations with other business owners and like-minded individuals in our industry.
Fantastic. So we're just going to jump right in, but let's kind of break this content down for our listeners. And let's just start with a pretty fundamental topic to building some business finance savvy, which I think is a really important thing as a dealer or contractor to know. Let's talk about variable costs versus fixed costs. You know, what they are, maybe some of the differences between them, and a few best practices in how to manage that.
Well, variable costs consist of a couple different major items in our industry, and all industries, I guess. You talk about the direct materials and direct labor that are applied to each project. A variable cost is a cost that increases over time. The more work you do, then the higher that value, that expense column goes. So if you do 10 wells, you'll have expenses of X. If you do 20 wells, you'll have expenses of X squared. So it just continues to rise. And your labor as well, the labor that is applied to each one of these task groups. Mm-hmm. Fixed costs are costs that stay flatlined through the year. They're expected costs. This is how much we're going to spend here. And those will include, they could include mortgages, they could include equipment costs. I do break it down one step further in the fixed cost arena, mm-hmm. because of the tremendous variability in asset costs and asset allocation to a given task group. And as a task group, I mean putting in pumps or doing service work on filtration or pumps versus the drilling of the well. Because the the costs vary so widely, mm-hmm. I don't think that it's fair to make the pump division or the repair division share those overhead costs. So I have chosen to put those fixed costs into that task group. So then you can effectively look at what it really costs you, what your expenses are per hour for that piece of equipment.
Oh, that's really smart. And just, fixed costs, a lot of times people simply think of fixed costs as overhead expenses. You're talking about some other things here. Are there other examples? Like, can you break down overhead a little bit? or some other examples of fixed costs beyond overhead?
Well, in the overhead market, overhead will also include administrative expenses. It will include utilities, taxes, licenses, certifications, fees, and sales. You certainly can add those pieces into it. And then executive overhead. If you have somebody running a company that doesn't actually go out and they're not a direct labor expense to a particular task, then that's a fixed overhead, and that'll have to be shared by everyone. And I share that across the board on a revenue-based approach, a percentage of revenue generated per task group or division as compared to the gross revenue of the company. Okay. So I think that's a pretty fair comparison because it takes as much effort from that group to do billing and all that for wells as it does water systems.
Sure. And then, and I was reviewing your presentation earlier today, and I saw that you had this concept of open door costs, and that's not a term I'm familiar with, so I was wondering if you could kind of walk us through that.
Well, the open door costs are really in your fixed cost structure. You take your fixed costs of buildings, utilities, maintenance. Those I sort of put those into open door costs. The guy that mows the lawn, your maintenance on your facilities and those kind of things. Those are your open door costs. So how much does it cost for me to walk up in the morning and turn that key and hit the light switch?
Okay.
So it's sort of a subcategory of fixed costs. But it's something that the more you drill down into either variable or fixed costs, the farther down into it you drill and the more you look at it, the better handle you get on managing those costs and then the revenue that's associated. You have an idea what kind of revenue you have to generate. If you don't know where you are, you don't know where you're going.
Sure. And why do you think it's so important, like as a sort of a base building, or again, I said fundamental earlier, like when you're learning about small business finance and how to run, some better ways to improve the management of your business, why do you think it's so important to understand this difference between variable and fixed?
Well, your variable costs have to be covered on every job. The fixed cost that is applied to that particular task group has to be covered on every job in order to get to what we call a contribution margin. The contribution margin is the revenue generated from operations that covers the fixed costs and the profit. So that's where, as we go through the process, and you have to build this in a manner at which you can understand, interpret, and be able to then forecast forward where your company is going.
The latest Spell and Gossip podcast series on Solving Water features manufacturers, reps, and Xylem experts discussing industry trends at the 2020 AHR Expo. Get all 10 episodes wherever you listen to podcasts. So maybe some best practices you can help share with us on how contractors can best manage variable and or fixed costs, and maybe even overhead expenses.
Well, in your variable costs, the biggest pieces to manage in the variable costs are your labor and efficiency with labor.
Okay.
Right. The materials are going to cost what they cost, and then you put a markup on those materials. Mm-hmm. That will then be applied to covering your fixed costs, and you're going to make your contribution margin. So then your direct labor is probably that biggest in the variable cost structure. Efficiency with fuel, mileage on your vehicles, tires, those other maintenance items in your vehicles. How efficient are you at scheduling? And your repair and service market, how do you have that set up? Are you running 40 miles one way to run 60 miles the other way, or could we have put the 60 miles one way in one day with some other projects in that area? You start to get into business efficiencies, and that also really talks to the labor component that goes along with it. The fixed expenses, you've got to have good equipment. You have to have the resources necessary in a fixed cost structure to be able to do your job every day and support the people that are out in the field doing it. And you can certainly manage that, but there's a difference in my mind between managing that and being cheap.
So give us some examples of how you've sort of, as you've grown your knowledge in this area, have applied some of these things to your business.
Well, a lot of it are the tools that we use, how our trucks are set up, what we carry on them, so when we get to the job site, we can do what we need to do. One of the things that's been said to me many times is I'd rather be looking at it than looking for it. And that really holds true, because if you've got a crew out there that's doing a job that's an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours from home and they're missing some 10-cent part and they got to stop and run to a hardware store and pay retail for it and that kind of stuff, I mean, that just really kills your efficiency over time, having those trucks set up. Also, we have gone to vehicle tracking. We've gone to real-time vehicle tracking on our service vehicles so that my coordinator and scheduler in the office knows where these vehicles are and how long they've been on the job and when she can expect that they will be ready to move on to the next one. So if we have another service call, say, yeah, we should be able to be there in 60 or 90 minutes, or we can't get there today. She has some idea of where they are, how long they've been there, what the project is, and when they can expect to be leaving. So a couple pretty big things that we have done in recent years.
Just a question on, every year I'm guessing you get a price increase from most of your distributors. How do you tend to handle that with your fixed costs then? Do you typically pass that on to who you're selling to, or how is that typically handled?
Well, I think if you're running an appropriate markup, if you're running appropriate margins so that you cover your fixed costs that are beyond the contribution margins and your identified profit margins at the end of the year, that if a supplier gives me a 3% increase in materials or 2% or 5%, whatever that is, there's no way that we can absorb those costs over time. We have to pass those on. And we have to be diligent with how we do it. And the more intelligent that your financial structure makeup is and the easier to read it is, the easier it is to identify when you need to pass those on. And if we're doing a bunch of work and things are great and our volumes are up and our margins are way up, can I absorb a 5% increase for a short period of time? I can. But I have to know that I can before I can.
Gotcha.
How do you know, are there any telltale signs for our listeners that you know that you need to get a better handle on either variable or fixed costs? Are there any, you talked a lot about efficiency and obviously that relates to savings, but are there anything specific where you're where you need to start to really dig into this a little bit more?
Gee, I think I'll make money this year. Gosh, I hope I make money this year. Means you don't have a very good handle on your finances.
Okay.
You don't know what those cost structures are. You can't interpret them. In order to be able to forecast, you have to know where you are, and you have to be able to look back. And if I look back over 5 years, I can look at trends. Now, when you talk about the red flags, if you can't pay your bills, take your 2% discounts. If you're letting your vendor be your lender for any period of time, you got a cash flow issue. You may or may not have a profit issue or an issue with meeting your contribution margin to cover your fixed costs. So that's a red flag that goes up. So then you have to identify where is this issue? Is it just a matter of times of billing, waiting for that 60 days or 90 days for that big invoice to come in, so you can go ahead and take care of those accounts payable? So unless you take a really good look at the numbers, you really don't know. You can't drill down and figure out where you're going the wrong way, if you're going the wrong way. I'm not saying you are, but those are red flags.
Sure, but it could be overwhelming for some folks, especially a lot of these business owners are actually doing a lot of on the work stuff, on the job stuff, like on-site work. So it's really, it's a challenge to balance that time. So, where do you even start if you want to start digging into this stuff? Do you have some ideas?
I think that you have to take some time when things slow down. Most of us are seasonal. There's some areas of the country that are less seasonal than others, but especially in the Rust Belt above the Mason-Dixon line, we're pretty seasonal. So in the wintertime, you need to find some time to start reviewing this. That's when I use it. I use my time during the winter when we're slow to actually really look at the financials, look at the trends, do the forecasting, and set my pricing structures for next year based on what I think our gross revenue is going to be and what our gross expenses are going to be. The biggest piece is the asset replacement area. In that arena there, that's the hardest one to really get your mind around, because you got a really long-term debt service on a major piece of equipment, and we can't see the future. So that makes that pretty intimidating.
Sure, and we're going to get into that in a little bit, which is going to be great. So it's winter. I have some time. I'm committed to looking at my business at a deeper level. Are there resources out there, a place to go to get even just like a template? Like, I mean, how do you start? You just, Excel spreadsheet, or are there resources or software out there for people that they can easily access?
My process evolved over time based on business programs that we run, the computing software, business software that we have. And over time, I evaluated where we were, how we were doing, and I continued to break columns down. And by breaking columns down, we began putting repair and maintenance against a particular vehicle over time. We had any chargebacks or any warranties or any of that labor that we had to go back out. We started applying that toward particular projects. So you begin to see trends as you go forward. You can see the trends. You look back over the last 3 to 5 years and you can say, wow, our warranties have gone up. Why? Is it because something we did? Is it product related? Is it application related? What is it? So it evolved over time based on the program itself, but I also have taken some college courses on financing and understanding the numbers. I have always worked really closely with my financial people, banks, and my accountant as well. They're all resources and they're all tools in your ability to run your business better. You're going to have to utilize them.
Sure. And you made a comment at lunch about the banker as being a really important resource, and we want to share that here. Absolutely.
They understand finance. They're the ones that look at your P&Ls and your balance sheets and your statements of owner's equity and look at over time, what is your debt service, what's your percentage, and they're the ones that have got the sharp eyes. They're going to tell you whether they're going to loan you the money or not on your next venture. So why wouldn't they be a resource for looking at where you are right now and giving you some advice too? I've had a couple bankers over time that would come in, we'd sit down and we'd have a 2 or 3 hour conference on where we are, kind of the State of the Union address. Sure. Almost. And that was very advantageous to me.
That's great. Anything else you want to touch on in this sort of sphere? I know we're having a nice conversation. We've got a few more topics to cover, but anything else in this world of variable and fixed costs that we haven't covered?
No, you just take a look at the numbers and put together, finance is the ability to be able to put a whole bunch of numbers on a page and make sense out of it. That's the hardest part, right?
Sure.
You put that stuff on a page. If you had a whole bunch of numbers all over a page, it's like, where do I go from here?
Yeah.
You have to be able to put them in order and assemble them in a fashion so that you can understand them and interpret them. So whatever that is, doesn't matter. It's whatever works for you. But the best advice I can give is to actually do it. Take some time and do it, because your business doesn't run itself.
Sure, and it sounds like the more specific you can be, you've really benefited from that in your personally, like just you said breaking down columns. I'm guessing that means just really understanding the elements of each of those categories when you're looking at variable versus fixed.
That's right. That's correct.
The Solving Water podcast is produced and distributed by Xylem. a global water technology company of more than 16,000 employees committed to solving critical water and infrastructure challenges worldwide. Stream, download, and subscribe